Hey everybody, Neil Bradshaw from UberPi, and I'm going to show you what happens when you first boot into RetroPie for the very first time and you have to configure a controller. And for the controller type, we're not going to use what we normally would use. Normally, I would recommend always 99% of the time to use this style controller, which is your PS3 style controller. But for this time, because there's going to be buttons that are missing, I want buttons to be missing from the controller. I don't want to have every button on there. I'm going to configure a different type of controller. And the one I'm going to configure is something like this. The one I got mounted is about the same as this. So I'm holding this up for reference, but it's a big joystick. And it's not going to have your analog joysticks like the PS3 controller has. The little ones that are down there, like right here. It's not going to have any of those. So we're going to have to skip some buttons. So that's why I'm purposely choosing that, because you may have a controller. You may go as low as an old NES style USB controller or anything up from there, and you're not going to have some buttons, and you're going to want to know how to skip buttons in the configuration. So I'm going to show you that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and fire it up. We're going to do this demonstration on an UberPiMini. But regardless, even if you have to go through Berry Boot to go to RetroPie, which that's covered in other videos, you should be okay. It should install. It's all about the same. Once you start booting into RetroPie, it's all about the same. So it's just going through its boot sequence now. Okay, now it's loading up Emulation Station, and it should give me a thing saying that it wants to configure my controllers. Okay, one gamepad detected. So at this point, you just go ahead and push and hold one button on it, and you run through it. So D-pad up, you go up, down, left, right. That covers the joystick part. If it was a controller, it would be the directional pad. And so we had start, and then select, and then you want your A, B, X, Y. So A, B, X, Y. And for the A, B, X, Y, I've gone over this in a lot of videos. It's imperative that people understand this, that the best setup that I found is A, B, X, Y. So it's your right button for A, your bottom button for B, your top button for X, and your left button for Y. Regardless of what the controller says. It can say whatever it wants, but that's what I use. And so then we're going to go with left shoulder, which I'm just going to use one of the buttons on the big pad. And then right shoulder, left trigger, right trigger. See, now I've got a problem though, because I don't have a left thumb. I don't have a left thumb button, which is the analog joysticks that are on the PS3 controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push two buttons at the same time. Boom. Not defined. Push two buttons at the same time. Not defined. Keep pushing two buttons at the same time. Not defined. Not defined. And this just keeps going on and on. And you do this for every button that you just don't want to have anything associated with it. You just don't want it to be defined. And that's that's pretty much it at this point. We've gotten to it. We're through it. Everything was configured right. If you need to go back up and change something, just go up. And all you have to do is, if you get on one like this one right here, where it says button 6, you push 2 buttons at the same time. It'll let you redefine the key and you can push the right one. Now, the only time you're ever going to have a problem is if the right one's defined by another one. Then you end up in a real sticky mess. And I will have resources on the website for how to reset your controller configuration. You can also just go into RetroPie, and if you can fumble around with the bad controller configuration, you can get back to configuring your controller, and I'll show you that here in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of this. And we are actually out of it right now. It's just, sometimes you got to mash a few buttons to get out of it. When it says okay, it's not just a clean exit for some reason. Sometimes you got to sit there and it's going to take a while. Don't worry, it's fine. But whenever you get out of it, you may be in some weird screen and you just got to fly out of that screen. And I would cover navigation, but navigation's covered in another video, so I'd recommend you just watch that video. So if you hit your start button and go down to configure input, hit your A button, it's going to ask you if you want to configure input. I'm going to answer no at this time because I don't want to configure my input. But that's where you would go to reconfigure your input. So as long as you get your directional pad right and you know what button is your A button and your B button, if you just get those right, those are the critical buttons. Actually, the start button too. So the directional pad, the A, the B, and the start. If you get those right, if you can figure out which ones when your controller configuration was messed up, those are, then you can get to this point where you can do it over again. If you're botched up beyond repair, you're going to either have to plug in another controller. It gets a little hairy from there, because then basically the best option is to actually go ahead and reset your controller configuration, which is not hard to do, but for people that aren't technologically inclined, they might view it as a hindrance. And I could maybe at a later date post a video on that, but it's kind of going to involve me walking around and doing stuff, so I'm not going to do that today. But that's it pretty much for your first boot into RetroPie, and how to configure your controller regardless of what kind of controller you have. If you have the PS3 or you have something else that has less buttons than the PS3, you should be able to get in and play your games. All of the games. Alright, thank you. Have a good day.